Hello and welcome to Samuel's Fortress. I'm your host Kirill, and today we're going to be taking a little bit of a break from our ongoing discussion on the Western Balkans during the early medieval period to discuss a document that has proven to be particularly controversial recently during the ongoing Macedonian, Bulgarian historical disputes, historical debates, and so forth. And that is the 1899 letter from Gotse Delchev to Nikola Maleshevski, the revolutionary from the city of Berovo. And the controversy stems from the fact that in that letter, Delchev refers to himself and the other revolutionaries as Bulgarians. And here is a copy of that letter in its original form. And here we can see the English language translation of that letter, which reads as follows, quote, Kolyo, I have received all the letters sent by you and through you. Let us not allow the splits and splintering to frighten us. It is indeed a pity, but what can we do, since we are Bulgarians and all suffer from one common disease? If this disease had not been present in our ancestors, from whom we inherited it, they would have never fallen under the scepter of the Turkish Sultan. Our duty is not to give ourselves over to this disease, of course, but how much can we affect others? So, as you can imagine, the main controversy that surrounds this letter is the fact that Gotse Delchev, in the letter, declares himself to be a Bulgarian. And not only does he refer to himself as a Bulgarian, but also to Nikola Maleshevski and the other revolutionaries as well. Beyond that, he also confirms the pre-Ottoman identity of the Bulgarians. He confirms the medieval Bulgarian identity, if you will, despite attempts by modern Macedonians to delegitimize or negate the existence of a pre-Ottoman or medieval Bulgarian identity, despite the fact that medieval Bulgarian identity is very well documented, not just in Bulgarian history, but also in Byzantine history and world history in general. That fact is really not controversial. So those are some of the main controversies surrounding this letter from the Macedonian perspective. However, to me, this letter is not controversial at all, really, because it really doesn't tell us anything new. It just confirms facts that we already know. It's clear that the IMRO, or the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization, was a Bulgarian organization. We know that the IMRO was essentially an outgrowth of Vasilevsky's Internal Revolutionary Organization, and that the IMRO was aimed at liberating the Bulgarian lands post-1878 division, post-Treaty of Berlin. That is why the organization worked not only to liberate Macedonia, but also to liberate Thrace as well, which is why during a certain period of time the organization was known as the Internal Macedonian Adrianople Revolutionary Organization. So, and we also know this from the memoirs, the writings of the early revolutionaries. We know that they were Bulgarian based on their own declaration as Bulgarian, and because they were fighting for the liberation of these Bulgarian lands. Therefore, like I said, this letter doesn't really tell us anything new, but it is a confirmation of those facts. Now, to me, the interesting part of this letter, like I said, isn't that Gotse Delchev declares himself to be Bulgarian, which is something we already know. But the interesting part of this letter, from my perspective, is the message that Gotse Delchev is trying to get across here. Whenever this letter is discussed, from what I can tell, people tend to myopically focus on the word Bulgarian and kind of the declaration of Gotse Delchev as a Bulgarian, but no one really seems to ever discuss the message that Gotse Delchev is trying to convey to Nikola Maleshevski. To me, the important part of the letter is the disease that Gotse Delchev refers to. So if we look back at that letter, he writes, quote, let us not allow the splits and splintering to frighten us. It is indeed a pity, but what can we do, since we are Bulgarians and all suffer from one common disease? So what's this disease that Gotse Delchev is referring to? Well, it is the splits and splintering that divide them, that divide the Bulgarian people. The disease that plagues the Bulgarians is the disunity and the infighting which has always existed among them. And it is this disunity which we will see not only up to this point when the letter is written, up until 1899, but throughout the 20th century. Unfortunately, just a few years after Gotse Delchev writes this letter in 1899, we will see this disease of disunity, of splitting and splintering, take concrete form, and that will be in the form of this work on Macedonian matters by Krste Petkov Misirkov, which was written in 1903, which to me is a perfect example of this disease that Gotse Delchev speaks of. Misirkov essentially, and the reason I'm saying this is because Misirkov essentially ignores Delchev's message entirely by preaching the disunity, the splits and the splintering that Gotse himself warned of. And here I will quote from the preface of Misirkov's work, where he writes, quote, "Some will ask why I speak of breaking away from the Bulgarians, where in the past we have called ourselves Bulgarians, and when it is generally accepted that unification creates strength, not separation." So we see here that Misirkov consciously works towards a situation that he knows is very likely to bring weakness as opposed to strength. His idea of radical ethnic separatism, of this early Macedonist idea, is exactly what Delchev warned against. And I should be fair here to Misirkov. Not long after he writes this work on Macedonian matters, a few years later, certainly by the Balkan War period, as we can see from his writings, his journal, his diary during the Balkan Wars in 1913, that he essentially rejects these kind of hard-line, radical Macedonist ideas that he puts forward in non-Macedonian matters. By the Balkan War period, we can certainly see that he pulls back again from this idea. He starts referring to himself as a Macedonian Bulgarian. He kind of, we see, rejects the more hard-line Macedonist positions that he puts forward in on Macedonian matters. But in any case, in 1903, he did put forward those ideas, and which we'll be discussing in future videos. But we can see here that this is exactly the type of disease that Gotse Delchev warned against. Needless to say, Misirkov's ideas back in 1903 regarding the ethnic separatism of the Macedonians from the other Bulgarians is not shared by the Internal Macedonian Revolutionary Organization. The IMRO, while it is engaged in a form of political separatism, is not engaged in any sort of ethnic separatism. The political separatism is necessary due to certain geopolitical realities. As we discussed in the past, post-Treaty of Berlin, post-1878, it was not possible to unite all the Bulgarians under one government, under one state. So therefore, Macedonian political separatism, Macedonian autonomy, is the avenue which the IMRO chooses to pursue in order to liberate the Bulgarians in Macedonia from the Ottoman Empire. And here we can refer to the famous quote by Hristo Tatarchev, the first president of the Central Committee of the IMRO, where he writes, quote, "We talked a long time about the goal of the organization, and at last we fixed it on the autonomy of Macedonia with the priority of the Bulgarian element. We couldn't accept the position of directly joining Bulgaria because we saw it would meet big difficulties by reason of confrontation of the great powers and the aspirations of the neighboring small countries in Turkey. It passed through our thoughts that one autonomous Macedonia could easier unite with Bulgaria subsequently, and if worst came to worst, that it could play a role as a unifying link of a federation of Balkan people." So we should not be confusing the kind of tactical political separatism of the IMRO with Misirkov's disease of ethnic separatism and a division of the Bulgarian people on these ethnic lines. One of the greatest examples of the absurdities that result from this disease, or one of the worst examples, depending on your perspective, is how this disease, which has led to modern Macedonism, has caused the Macedonians not only to distort, but also to spit on their own history. The greatest absurdity of all this is how the disease that Gotse Delchev warned of has led to the Macedonians spitting on the memory of Gotse Delchev himself. They denied their own past, which we all know. However, they also deny the very identity of Gotse Delchev himself. If they truly respected Gotse Delchev, they would have respect for his self-identification as a Bulgarian. They wouldn't go around changing how he identified himself. There's a total lack of respect when the modern Macedonians attempt to change his national self-consciousness. Not only that, but they also spread the very disease that Gotse Delchev warned of, that is the division of the Bulgarian people. So while the modern Macedonians, the modern Macedonists, claim Gotse Delchev as a national hero, we see that these same Macedonians will trample not only on his memory, but also on the message that Gotse Delchev was trying to send. Now, I will end this video on a positive note by stating that I am hopeful, I am optimistic that one day, hopefully in the not too distant future, we will overcome this disease, especially some of the absurd excesses of modern Macedonism, which this disease has led to, and we will restore the cultural, historic, and spiritual unity that existed between these two brotherly nations of Macedonia and Bulgaria. It is important that we overcome this disease, not only to heal the schism that has erupted between the two modern republics of Macedonia and Bulgaria, but in order to properly honor the memory and the message of Gotse Delchev himself.